Hello, hello. We're here. We're live. Welcome to the show, everybody, and welcome to the show, Mary Ellen Dance, who is joining us live and is a real therapist who's not a self-help guru. Woohoo!
Yay! I don't like self-help.
We'll do the applause. There
Ooh.
you go. So,
Great.
yes, so thank you for joining us on Kia's World channel. We have some people watching and viewing and excited about this topic. So who are you? Where did you come from? What do you do? Tell us all the things.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. First of all, this is so fun. I am a licensed mental health counselor, which we'll talk about, but I sit in a room with people who struggle with mental illness and talk to them.
Awesome.
And try to help them. I also am a psychology professor at a local university, and I am the host of a podcast called the Okay-ish podcast, where I try to kind of like translate all these trendy mental health terms into, you know, what they actually mean.
Digestible content for us to understand. And I think that's why I like your podcast so much. I was actually a guest on the podcast a while back, and I enjoyed it so much. I went back and listened to all the episodes because your style is exactly what I was hoping that self-help was when I got into it. And then now that I've seen what self-help can, the damage it can cause, finding someone like you, I was like, oh, see, this is good advice, because basically you always come back to whatever you need to do, figure it out. And this is some general tips, but also go and see somebody, continue your work. This is not just do it and thank me later. And I think you also, you have the nuance level, and it's not about being made for more, as Rachel Hollis would say. It's all about being okay-ish. And I think you're really raw too. And even your introduction of yourself, you say in the podcast, if you go listen to it, it's I've had struggles with my life and my boyfriends, and I'm like, oh, okay.
Yeah, I got fired from a job, and that's what kind of started me opening my own business, stuff like that I am more than willing to share. Mm-hmm. And it's funny, when I actually started Okay-ish, I was talking to my producers about my brand and what I want it to be like. And the first thing I said was, I want it to be the anti-Rachel Hollis.
I love it. And I think it is, to be 100% honest. I think it is quite the opposite effect, because not one I can't think of one person, maybe the Pope, perhaps, has the answers that can solve all of, humanity's problems in just a quick 30-minute podcast. But that's what a lot of these self-help people claim. They're like, oh, just listen to this, just do this 3-step process and we're good. And that bothers me so much.
It's wild. It's wild. And that's why with the podcast, I try to, thank you for pointing this out, because I try to always say, this is just some information that is more succinct than Googling things and trying to figure it out, but it doesn't mean it's going to work for you or whatever it may be.
Yeah, definitely. So since you have so many skills and you have the official title, I put it on the name tag, you're an LMHC, right?
I am.
Okay. So that to me is something that I can look at and go, yeah, that looks good. It looks official. But then I'm like, wait, what does it stand for? And I think a lot of people also have similar questions, but maybe feel a little bit uncomfortable asking, because I don't know, there's probably a concept or a name of it, but you always assume other people know more than you, or at least that's how I do. So I feel stupid asking, hey, I should already know this. Everyone else in the world knows what LMHC stands for. But that's not necessarily true. And I think people may get tripped up when they're first trying to maybe look for a therapist. They don't know what they're actually calling or who they're going to get. They're kind of blind. And I don't want to speak for everyone, but that's how I felt, because I've been to therapy on and off basically my whole life since I was a kid. And, in the beginning, I wasn't obviously looking up Psychiatrist in the phone book. My parents were. But, I never learned what the difference was. And I didn't have a therapist. I went to a psychiatrist in college. But even then, I didn't know, they were just kind of more prescription writing, and I didn't even know the difference. And I was like, well, when are we going to talk about my feelings? They're like, oh, no, that's That's not what I do. So I was like, oh, okay. And, so someone who has dealt with psychologies and mental health issues my whole life, I still am confused. So I thought maybe if I could have you on the show, we could get some of these questions answered.
Well, I'm glad you're asking because, full disclosure, I didn't really know what the differences meant until I was in grad school for this.
Okay, good. Okay, that actually makes me feel a lot better. A lot better, actually. And before we switch, so basically I'm going to ask a bunch of questions because I went online and just searched therapist. And these are the different types of titles that came up. So I want you to break it down. But first, we got to do the official plug. So in case anyone's wanting to listen immediately after this live stream is over, don't leave this live stream to listen. But once it's over, you can go listen to Okayish on Apple Podcasts, on Google Play. I'm sure it's all on the podcast platforms.
Spotify, all the places.
Everywhere. Yep. You'll get a lot of info. And if you want to hear our interview, go back a little bit. When did you do that? Like 6 months ago or so? Maybe less.
Yeah, in like October.
Okay. So if you want to hear me and Mary Ellen talk about Rachel Hollis a little bit, we talk about other things too, but obviously Rachel Hollis is part of that. You can go do that. So I'm going to look at some questions first. So if you have any questions for Mary Ellen or myself or just about therapy in general, please leave them in the chat. If you can put the letter Q in front, I learned this tip the other day. If you put the word or the letter Q and then put your question, I can search all of the questions so that we can come to them a little bit faster because I know the comments come in kind of fast. So if you have a specific question, put Q, colon, and then put your question. Okay, so that's Mary Ellen's podcast, sub, and write a review.
Oh, yeah. Oh, my gosh. Apple loves that. So that would be great.
Yes. I know. That's why I always hear, they're like, please write me a review. I need it. So it's like, okay, that's the way to help podcasters to get more subs. But while we're here's a website that I created on Canva this morning. Me searching, I need therapy with 3 exclamation points because a lot of times when you're needing these services, you're kind of in a place where you're like, all right, I need help tomorrow or right now or yesterday, essentially. But where do you begin? How do you know which one's right for you? Are you going to walk into an office where you're going to be hypnotized by a life coach? Who knows? Well, Mary Ellen knows.
I know. And let's try to prevent that.
Yes, exactly. So don't go in blind. We want to know what the heck we're talking about, who we're talking to. So I figured we'd start with an easy one. LMHC, which is what you are.
That is what I am. Okay, so that is what I am. By the way, Rach, thank you. Rach just subscribed, and I feel so excited and giddy. So thank you. So I am an LMHC. So what that means is I got a bachelor's degree, a 4-year bachelor's degree, and then I went and got a master's degree in mental health counseling. And then after my master's degree in mental health counseling, I just had a master's in mental health counseling. I wasn't licensed. Mm-hmm. I then had to work in the field, supervised for 3,000 hours.
Wow. Take
a test. And once I passed the test and worked in the field for 3,000 hours, then I got my license.
How many years was something from when you got your bachelor's to when you were licensed? How many years was that?
It's about 1.5 years to 2 years. Oh, from my bachelor's to my license?
Mm-hmm. So you do
bachelor's to license.
4 years bachelor, and then you have to go to...
My grad program was about 2.5 years,
wow.
And then about 1.5 years to 2 years after that. So
it's a long process.
5 years. Yes. Mm-hmm.
So life coaching that says become a life coach in 5 seconds, that's not quite the same.
Not the same at all. I saw an ad on Instagram the other day for become a life coach for $7. The other thing with my license and with actually all the licenses that we'll talk about today is there's continuing education. So I have to renew my license. My license is only valid for 3 years at a time. So I have to renew it. And within those 3 years, I have to get a certain amount of continuing education hours to renew my license. And so it's actually really, really similar to lawyers, right? Like a lawyer gets a law degree and then has to take the bar exam.
Yeah.
And then they have continuing education. So it's a very similar to that.
Okay. And we talked about this before off camera, but there's some rules with who you can see, right? You can't go across certain geographical areas. Is that all therapy or is that just certain ones?
It's all licenses. So all licenses are from your specific state departments.
Okay.
So I am licensed to practice in New York State and I cannot practice anywhere else. Now, it's pretty, I don't want to say easy because it's not easy because dealing with the Department of State is always kind of a pain.
Yeah.
But you can get dual licensed. So like if I wanted to get licensed in Florida, I would probably have to take the Florida exam and then they would probably like transfer my credits over and I'd probably have to fill out a lot of paperwork and then I'd be licensed. Something like that. Like I wouldn't have to go to school again.
Okay.
But kind of in that arena, if that makes sense. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. And how many would you say does the average LMHC have, like patients have? How many patients do they have a week on average? Do you know? Like how many patients does like the average person with this title have?
Usually the average is between 22 and 28 a week.
That's a lot. That's like a full schedule.
Yes, it's a lot. It depends on where you work. So like I work in private practice, I work for myself, so it's a little bit different. If I worked at like a hospital, there's usually requirements for how many people you see a week. And it's usually somewhere between the 22 to 28.
Okay, gotcha. All right, so that's LMHC, licensed mental health counselor. So if you were to see someone like that on Google, you can pretty much trust they have at least several years, if not more, education behind them that is helping them, plus continuing education, plus a license that is up to date. And they do a lot of these providers do the hybrid now, the online and in person, or is it now switching more back to in person?
It's most people are doing hybrid, and you can also look people up. Like you can ask. I mean, my license is hanging in my office, but if you look up like Mary Ellen Dance, like LMHC, like New York State, you can look up like my license number and like when it renews. Like it's all public information.
Okay, that's cool. That's awesome. And I feel like if you were to not have it anymore, you could see that it was no longer updated. Okay.
Yes.
That's good to know. Okay, so before you book your appointment with any therapist or anybody, look up this information, just Google it and make sure they're up to date so they're not, giving you services in the back alley of some place or online in some chat room on AIM. Like, okay, guys, here we go. Okay, licensed mental health counselor. Got it. Now I feel like I know. I will never forget that one. Okay, psychologist.
Psychologists are doctors. You can call them doctor. They do not prescribe medications because their doctor, so, PhDs, psychologists have like a separate designation called a PsyD,
Okay.
which is basically like made up.
Love it.
There's nothing wrong with it. It's just made up. So psychologists, they do the exact same thing I do. You can meet with clients, they can do the exact same thing I do. Their schooling involves a little bit more research. So my schooling was more based in like application. Their schooling involves application and research.
Okay.
So in practicality, we do the same things. But the schooling is just like a little bit different.
Gotcha. So psychologists are more the ones who the news anchors say. Psychologists now say if you have 5 friends, your life will be 25% more full of life, or whatever they say. That's psychologists. Okay.
Yeah.
Do psychologists often have patients or have as many patients as a licensed mental? Okay.
Yep. Again, like our jobs, like my job with a psychologist is fairly interchangeable. I just want to note, Gina says that many are also PhD. So be careful with that. So someone who has a PhD in psychology, there is no license that exists for them to practice seeing clients. So someone with a PhD in psychology, they can go on to do research, maybe they can go on to teach, things like that. But they cannot see clients because there's no license for them to see clients. Does that make sense?
Yeah, interesting. Okay, so they have to have, you can go to school, graduate, great, but if you don't pass the exam or get your license updated, is it expensive to do your license to fill the paperwork out, or?
Yeah, I don't remember off the top of my head, and it's probably different for every state, but it's a pain in the butt.
Gotcha. Okay.
It's expensive and it's a pain, and renewing it every 3 years is expensive. Oh, yes. Erica also mentioned psychologists also do testing. So school psychologists, for example, they do testing for like ADHD and things like that I cannot do.
What type of testing? Is it like usually questionnaire type things?
Questionnaires, observations, parent questionnaires, maybe like IQ, different types of like IQ or cognitive tests, things like that.
Gotcha. Okay, so if someone came to your office and can you suspect that, okay, this patient probably has ADD, then did you have to refer them to someone else to diagnose that, or can you?
So unfortunately, that's a kind of a complicated question, which it shouldn't be, but it kind of is. For a child to get services in school, like get an IEP, things like that, they need the testing from a school psychologist.
Gotcha. So mom calls you and says, my kid's got some issues, I want them tested, you might send them back to the school and then they can come see you perhaps, or something. I know this is like a specific question to a hypothetical situation, but
no, that's totally okay. Excuse me. So I can still see the kid and treat the kid for ADHD if I have a specialty in ADHD and work with that a lot and know what I'm doing. I can still, like diagnose and things like that. But again, if they want the services in the school and the extra services, they want to do the testing.
Gotcha. Okay. And Gina says, and there are different licenses. Oh God, I can never say that word. I'm going to say licenses under the umbrella of therapist, licensed professional counselor, licensed marriage. Yeah, we're getting to that. We're getting to those exact titles so we can break it all down. But while we're here, I see a lot of questions coming in, so I don't want to leave people hanging too long with their questions. So let's answer a couple if you don't mind. Let's see. I'll go back to the beginning. Oh, hey, Camellia is here in the comments. Welcome. Thank you for joining. I watched your video last night too, Camellia, about the Mean Girls, and I loved it. So everyone should watch that video too on Camelia's page immediately after this live stream's over and after you subscribe to Okay-ish.
You've got a lot to do today.
Yes. Okay, and speaking of Camellia, she says, what are your thoughts on hypnotherapy? Now, that's not anything related to what you do, right?
So hypnotherapy is not really a thing. So there's not really researchers, scientists, psychologists, everyone in the psychology field kind of like disagrees with a lot regarding hypnosis. So there's no perfect definition because it is like widely disagreed with. There are a few things that like all psychology people do agree on, that hypnosis can help with things like smoking cessation and things like that. But it's not typically practiced. What's being practiced more these days that I am actually trained in, which involves a whole separate training, but is EMDR. And we're going to talk about that later on in this live. People think that that's hypnosis and it's not. So when people say hypnotherapy, I don't really know what they mean because it's not really a thing.
You can't get a license from the state in hypnotherapy.
No.
Okay. That's good to know. Is it like art therapy where the word therapy is attached to activities that could be therapeutic? Is that sort of it?
I think what people mean is hypnosis, and there's not really any scientific research that hypnosis works or is evidence-based or anything like that. Again, most people in the field agree that it can help with things like smoking cessation, weight loss, things like that. But it's not an evidence-based form of treatment.
Oops, what am I doing? Hold on. I screwed this up, everybody. Stand by, hold on. I clicked the button and I shouldn't have clicked the button. Okay, that's really interesting. So, so if I decide tomorrow I want to open a hypnotherapy office, there's no laws preventing me from doing that, is what I gather. No,
not in the United States. From my understanding, and I am not the person to ask about this, but from my understanding, therapists in Europe call themselves hypnotherapists. So like therapists in America, we often call ourselves psychotherapists, and therapists in Europe will call themselves hypnotherapists. Again, that doesn't necessarily mean they're doing hypnosis.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. Perfect. Thank you. And we'll answer one more while I figure out my background problem. Okay, this is from Amanda Joe says, I have yet to find a therapist I really feel a connection to and who can actually help. I suspect I need more than what a standard therapist can offer. Any advice on how to find the right fit? That's a good question. I feel like a lot of people feel that way.
That's a really good question. Don't be afraid to fire a therapist. Don't be afraid to like shop around for therapists. Like some therapists are very, everyone's a different human and everyone has different styles. I think it's important to find a therapist that you get along with. Like truly, because if you get along with them and you trust them and want to talk to them, then and they obviously have the right qualifications and know the knowledge that can help you, then that's what makes the most sense. So it is completely fine to shop around. It's completely fine to, most therapists will say they'll do like a 15-minute phone consultation. Like call them and ask them questions and things like that.
Perfect. Okay, I'm still working on the background, everybody. I'm very sorry. I've never experienced this issue before, but that was a good. I think a lot of people have that issue, and for me too, I got lucky. I love my therapist, and I called her on a recommendation from a friend, and they said, it worked out. But a lot of people have waiting lists that are like a year long, and I feel like if you get in somewhere, a lot of people are like, I don't want to, miss this opportunity to take the person. So I feel like sometimes it's hard.
It's really hard. The other thing I want to say about it is if you call someone and they're not taking new clients, ask them for a recommendation because they'll recommend people that they trust, obviously. And it's also completely okay to judge a book by its cover. Like everyone tells you that that's wrong, but like all therapists have like a picture on their website or wherever you're looking at them. Like if you're like, ugh, right? You're not going to want to trust that person.
They don't look trustworthy to me. Okay.
Like it's all about like your comfort level and what you need. And if it's not a good fit, then that's completely fine.
Okay. We're going to do one more question because I think I figured this out. So I need to let you talk for a moment. Okay, Andrea, I never know how to pronounce, I'm so sorry, but maybe I got it right. I know an LMHC who stopped practicing and started life coaching. I raise an eyebrow. Thoughts on life coaching? I know you have thoughts.
I have quite a few thoughts on life coaching. So the reason that, and I don't know this person, but the reason that most LMHCs or anyone with a higher degree go to life coaching is number one, they can work with people outside of the state they're in without having to get a double license. And number two, right now, they will make a lot more money, which is something like an issue with society. So coaches technically focus on the future, like I am in complete support of like a career coach, right? You're going to them with a problem, you need help finding a job or a career you love. Okay, great. Like go for it. Fine. But life coaches are just fake therapists. Am I allowed to say that? I feel like that's mean. But
oh my God, don't worry about being mean. That's my daily struggle.
Like life coaches, like I see life coaches on Instagram every day that are talking about like trauma and all of these therapy things that like, A, you're not allowed to talk about. B, you can hurt people by talking about these things. Like talking about these things can be really, really dangerous. And so it scares me a lot that people are going to life coaches because they could inadvertently re-traumatize themselves, things like that.
Yeah.
So there's nothing that monitors life coaches. Like any of you could just like put a sign outside your door that says life coach and like charge a bunch of money and probably get people to sign up.
I see so many of those companies that are selling how to become a life coach, which is even crazier to me because if you're a life coach and I'm going to sell you how to become a life coach. So where's the actual training coming from? Is it coming from one life coach to another? Where does the life training come from?
There's literally none. And some people will tell you about like there's an international coaching foundation or something. It's ICF. I don't know what it stands for, that supposedly monitors life coaches. But first of all, you can call yourself a life coach without being accredited by this foundation. Second of all, this foundation doesn't, they say they monitor it, but like they don't really.
Yeah.
And third of all, coaching is becoming like way more like an MLM because people become a coach and then they start coaching other coaches. And I'm like, what are we coaching at this point? Like,
I know. That's what I wonder too. It's like,
what are we coaching?
Yeah. Like what skills do you possess? And okay, I'm going to see. Stand by, everybody. Hold on. I think I got it.
While we're standing by, Kitty mentioned so they can just hang out a sign, no licensing. Yes, they can. And no one is stopping them. And it is heartbreaking.
Well, and especially because when you said like you have 6 years of school to go through, 3 years of license, you have to reapply, you have to pay for it, you have to have continuing education, you have to make sure that you're not traumatizing patients, you have to make sure you're keeping yourself in check, getting yourself in therapy so you can give the right kind of therapy to your patients. That's a lot of money, time, effort, intelligence, dedication, commitment. When I could right now go, I am going to offer life advice for twice the price that you charge, and no one can stop me. That's crazy.
People are paying for it.
Yeah.
But I don't understand why people are paying for it. I really don't.
Because they don't. I think because it's hard to know. Like, we're trying to break down what psychologist versus licensed mental health counselor, because there is no source that I know of, unless you're interested in becoming one, where you can just find this information easily. And I wonder if I always think like the more conspirituality part or conspiritualist, I don't know. But I always think like, are they doing this on purpose so people don't get help? Like that's how far down I go. It's like, maybe it's better for like the government believes that we shouldn't have therapy because it is so difficult to find this information in a clear, concise way. If you search therapy in my hometown, whatever your hometown may be, I feel like there's no like clear, this is what this is. This is what that is. It's just.
Well, and it's scary because technically people who struggle with mental illness, whatever mental illness that is, technically are considered a vulnerable population. So it's also like preying on a vulnerable population, right? Like if you're struggling with something and you see like, oh, I can help heal your trauma, that's preying on a vulnerable population. Like it's so unethical. And if anyone wants to talk about this, I can talk about it all day long.
We all want it. This is why this channel exists, because I feel like that's all I care about too, is like basically talking about why these self-help people can get away with the things that they get away with. And a lot, what I see, and especially with Rachel Hollis, is a lot of times they take their own life, put it up for advice, and say, well, I overcame trauma, so take what I did and do it. And it's like, well, like, to me, that's the opposite of therapy. Therapy is talking about your own life, not talking about someone else's life and what they did. That's literally the opposite thing. But it's
also
rampant.
Consider the source. Like, do we really want to take advice from like these people who seem to live really unhealthy lifestyles? Like, I am not perfect, and I'm the first one to say it, but I go to therapy, like, and I'm very honest about the fact that I go to therapy and I want to do this, and all of that.
Yeah. And thank you to Kitty. I saw that you sent a super chat. I think it got lost with the graphics because I was in the middle of like changing 25 scenes. But thank you very much. I appreciate that very, very, very much. So, and we'll learn about that, super chats and stuff, because Mary Ellen is thinking about having a show too. So we're going to learn all about those fun things as we go along. Okay, and we'll keep answering your questions. So again, if you want to ask Mary Ellen a question about therapy or about psychology or whatever you want to ask, just put the letter Q and then colon and then write your questions so I can filter through the other comments. All right, so we talked about psychologists, so that's more studying and different things. Okay, let's see. Oops, okay. Psychiatrist. This is interesting because I just posted a video about a psychiatrist yesterday. So what is psychiatrist?
So psychiatrists prescribe medications. Psychiatrists typically do not do therapy. They can. They have the ability to, at least where I live in New York State, and at least where I live, psychiatrists are so, there's a need for them. So they just don't have time to do therapy. So psychiatrists often prescribe the meds, and then the therapist will do therapy, and then they can, if the consent is signed, obviously, they can talk to each other and collaborate and support the person in that way.
Now, this is something that I was thinking about the other day when I was working on the video, is a lot of people get psychiatric medication from a primary. They don't even go the psychiatrist route because it's hard or it's too long of a process, or why does that happen a lot?
So it happens because primaries can prescribe some psychiatric medications. And so like I take an anxiety medication, and that was originally prescribed by my primary. It's easier to get into the primary. I already had a relationship with my primary, all of those kinds of things. I personally don't think it's important to see a psychiatrist, just because, nothing against primaries, but psychiatrists specialize in it. They do it every day. So kind of like, why not? Why not see someone who specializes in it? Because psychiatric medications are very nuanced. And from my understanding, primaries can only prescribe like certain psychiatric medications, not all of them. So like, having a psychiatrist, if you're on something like a mood stabilizer or an antipsychotic, that's really important to have a psychiatrist who, again, specializes in that.
Yeah. Okay. But you could, like, let's say you think you have some anxiety, you're already going to the doctor for a routine checkup. You could mention that and they could prescribe something like that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And this is also a question right now. Going to your primary care doctor is a great place to start too. If you're saying like, I'm having trouble, they can recommend you to people. That's a really great place to start. The other best place to start is to go to psychologytoday.com.
Okay.
And type in your zip code, and there's just a directory of therapists in your zip code. Gotcha.
Okay. That helps. And I've used Psychology Today before for looking up things. But the one thing for me, and I don't have insurance now because I work for myself, and I don't want to spend $1,000 on whatever, insurance that I could qualify for. So I'm living dangerously, basically. But when I did have insurance, there was very strict rules as to who I could see and for what reason and what was in my network and what wasn't. And so I would go on Psychology Today and look up people. I'm like, this sounds great. And then I would look at my insurance and it would say, out of network or whatever. So you were really limited by who you could go and see. And so sometimes for me, I didn't have like a super, like my dad has bipolar disorder. He needs to see a psychiatrist every time that he gets his meds changed. For me, I had, general anxiety, some depression at the time. So I felt like, okay, I'm going to go to the regular doctor. And then if it gets worse, I'll go see someone, and then I'll go see the therapist and work on, talk therapy at the same time. So it's nothing wrong with that at all. You don't have to see like the PhD loving some, you know, basic anxiety or whatever.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. And insurance companies are, you know, we would need to do a whole other live on insurance companies, but you can also, if you have really good insurance, you can call your insurance company and ask them for a list of therapists near you that are in network, and they can give you a list.
Okay, that's good. Let's answer a question. I think this is a good, interesting one. So Harpist Hannah says, do you know much about the area of religious trauma therapy? Is that an established area of expertise, or is it mostly under the blanket of trauma-based therapy?
Currently, it's mostly under the blanket of trauma-based therapy, because whether we're talking about, you know, if somebody has a sexual trauma versus a violent trauma, that's kind of treated the same way too as it would be a religious trauma. You can, I don't know, I don't specifically work a lot with religious trauma. I haven't in the past. But if you're looking to work with that, you can always ask people about it and if they have experience with that. But you would definitely want to make sure that they are trained in a trauma specific therapy.
Okay. And not the exact question she asked, but with religion, I also hear often when you can't afford therapy, which is not cheap, basically anywhere for anyone, even if you have the copay, because you go so many times, it adds up quickly. An option that therapists often give is like, well, are you associated with a church or a synagogue or something that are they offering traditional therapy in these settings, or is it like a spiritual guidance type thing?
It's a spiritual guidance type thing. So like therapy and counseling are used like often interchangeably, and like pastors, ministers, whatever their title is, they can counsel people just like I can, you know, like in the broad sense of the term, just like how I can counsel you, Kia, to, I don't know, do something.
Thanks, Rebecca, for the sub, by the way. You see the little dinosaur at the top? That's someone subscribed to the channel.
That is so cute. I love that.
Sorry, go on.
So that, like, if you're, I mean, that's a great support if you feel close to that person. It can be really, really dangerous because that, you know, therapists in all the schooling I do, we're very, very trained to like not project our own feelings, our own values on other people. And so oftentimes with like religious counsel, that's projected, which is not great typically.
I always wondered that because I'm like, are priests like somehow getting these training and I'm just unaware, or so they can call themselves counselors, but they're not providing therapy. Okay. And let's just do one more question I see from Laura. And this is something that we want to talk about in a deeper, more involved level at some point in the future. But any alternatives to BetterHelp? That's the only platform my husband felt comfortable to finally go to therapy. But now I just found out BetterHelp is super problematic. I totally agree with the problematic statement. But I also will say, just on my own experience, I use Talkspace, which is similar to BetterHelp. And they're basically the same to me. I don't think BetterHelp is worse than Talkspace in that way. Do you have any opinions about like the texting therapy?
I personally don't love them. Obviously, so BetterHelp, for those of you who don't know, BetterHelp sells your information, which is against HIPAA. So BetterHelp has gotten a lot of negative press lately because it has been found out that they actually, you know, sell information. Talkspace, from my understanding, doesn't do that, or if they do that, they're sneakier about it. I don't think they do that.
Okay. That's good to know.
The problem with those sites is it's cheap, which is really, really great, and you can text with a therapist. The problem is therapists on those sites get paid in a weird way. So like last I knew, Talkspace, they paid the therapist based on like word count. So like the more words they typed, like the more they got paid. And it's weird. Like this kind of like weird thing that seems to walk the line of ethics. So if you're able to, I'd love for you to find a therapist not on those sites. Now, are there good therapists on those sites? I'm sure. I'm sure there are, but I'm also sure there aren't also.
Yeah, you have to be certified in some sort of therapy to be on the site, which is
Yes.
good. That's a step in the right, not life coaching, which I think is, okay, if you had the different levels of, if you're needing assistance, life coaching is probably the least, or career counselor or whatever, you know, that's not actually licensed in anything. Second, I would say is text therapy, so BetterHelp or Talkspace. And then ideal scenario, in person or on Zoom with a licensed therapist. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
The levels
absolutely.
of interest.
And Molly says that BetterHelp, that she likes BetterHelp. Thanks for sharing that. There are really great things about BetterHelp and Talkspace. I just want to let you know, Molly, like BetterHelp can do really shady things. Like, let's say you're talking to a therapist about an eating disorder, then all of a sudden you're getting ads for like diet pills. Like it's real, because they can like sell that information. So it's like in the internet world, in the cyber world, it's like really dangerous.
Well, that's the thing with BetterHelp too, is like the creators of it are not psychologists that just decide like this is the future, this is a great thing to do. It was someone, they had started a website that was similar to what they're doing now, but for like plumbing or something. It was like totally unrelated to psychology, but they had perfected the site to get people to buy contractors to redo their houses, and then they saw the money that could be made there for, you know, just doing they're not providing a service, they're providing the referral, basically. They're not psychologists themselves. They have to hire, it's like Uber, but they're just connecting you to a car. They don't own the car, if that makes sense. So that's the business. It's not that, you know, it was like dreamed up by someone, like this is the future of therapy. It was like, how do we make money? How do we, you know, not modernize, but how do we, what do you call it? Like put it in a factory, basically. Put it through the system, like, make it easier.
And there are good things about it. Like, there are good things about it. It's a good idea. And I'm sure there's great therapists on there. I'm also sure that there's probably not great stuff going on there, too.
Sure. That's a good point. But the good thing is, and, you know, it's hard to argue that, you said it's cheaper.
Yes. Yep,
so
it is.
You know, sometimes you got to just take what you can get. That's how, when I got in Talkspace, this is like 3-4 years ago, I couldn't afford the real therapy. I had just gotten let go from a job. So I was like, okay, I need some help. I need somebody to talk to that's not my boyfriend, because he's sick of it. And that's what I did. And I did it for a little bit. I didn't like it. And I eventually got into real therapy over time.
I would also suggest, if you want a cheaper alternative, ask for an intern. A lot of people are against seeing interns because they're young. They're clinical interns are in their final year of their master's degree. So they've already been through 6 years of school, and they're very, very closely watched by their supervisor, someone who is licensed. So like it is actually, sometimes clinical interns are probably, you know, really good because all this stuff is fresh in their mind.
Yeah, they're getting the information and giving it to you immediately.
Yeah. So that's always a good option too, because interns, you can see them for cheaper, but they're getting supervised by licensed people. Like everything is, you know what I mean? So, so that's a good option.
Okay. And we'll do one more question. You kind of already answered it a little bit, but Kitty asks, where should one start to find help safely?
Psychology Today. Psychology Today verifies people's licenses, so you can't just be on it. Like, they verify the license. So psychologytoday.com, or I would ask your primary doctor. Awesome. I think those are the two best ways.
Perfect. Okay. Life coach. We already sort of touched on this, but what certifications do life coaches need to practice trauma-based therapy to you?
None. Zero. Zilch.
So is this something you guys talk about a lot in, like, as therapists? Like, do you talk to your colleagues about life coaching and the struggles you go through with it?
Not really, because it doesn't, aside from annoying me and worrying me about people who go to life coaches, it doesn't really affect me. I just want to get the word, you know, I talk with colleagues about wanting to get the word out there and the education out there so people aren't going to a life coach, thinking that that life coach can help them with their trauma, and then accidentally, getting re-traumatized and things like that. So wanting to do that. Also, Suzanne mentions that the government supports free counseling services, phone and text support, and they're great for recommending further help. In the United States, you can call, there's a bunch of them, but 211 is Lifeline. So you can call 211. It's a 24/7 crisis line that you can call. They can give supports. Absolutely. Thank you for mentioning that.
Perfect. And thank you, Meredith, for subscribing. And this is not a question, but it's more of a statement and sort of a question. Dana Maria says, so many people are on some type of antidepressant or anti-anxiety meds. Are they over-prescribing?
So I am not a doctor. I cannot prescribe medications. So just that's clear, like I'm not speaking to that. I don't know the answer to that. I know that any doctors I work with don't prescribe medications unless the person is also seeing a therapist at the same time. Unfortunately, I know a lot of doctors who don't require that and who will prescribe the medication without, having the person see the therapist either. But I can't speak to that because I'm not a doctor and I don't want to, pretend to be a life coach and speak to things that I can't speak to.
As a therapist, I can't say, but as a life coach, here's my opinion.
Life coach, I can say what I want.
Yeah, here's the answer. Yeah, and I wonder that too sometimes because they say, it's same thing with autism. A lot of people make that connection as well. Like, well, back in 1970, only 1% of the population had autism. Now 5% has it. So they must be just making it up. And I think partly the answer that I've heard is that, well, they understand it better. They have better ways to diagnose. People are more, especially now, they're more apt to go to see somebody as opposed to back in the day, bringing their kid to a psychologist as opposed to, when it was like looked down upon. So that could be the reason. Maybe it's not overprescribed, but people that needed it back then and weren't willing are now going. But who knows? Again, I don't know. I have no training in anything, so I'm just making up stuff here. I'm a YouTuber with 0 certifications. So that'd be my thoughts. I don't know. Okay.
Right. I think that's a possibility too. I think it's probably a mix of a lot of things.
Yeah.
If I had to guess.
And I'll just give my 2-minute soliloquy about life coaching. So I saw a life coach. I mentioned this a couple times. Before I went to see the therapist that I'm with now, because the life coach, so I did this 6-week self-care group with other women that were into yoga. And which I have found yoga is very much like a gateway into life coaching because people, and this is just in my experience, but people in my yoga community, they're more so apt to be into wellness and alternative medicine and that sort of thing because yoga is very much like a lifestyle type thing. When some people just go to work out and exercise and get some stretching, but people who really love yoga and love yogi lifestyle, they're also a lot of other things in their life revolve around that yoga lifestyle. You know what I'm trying to say? I'm not trying to say that they're alternative, but they are. Like, they don't really like big pharma. A lot of people are vegan, like that sort of thing. Anyways, so I went to a group where a lot of people who love yoga were going to do life coaching as a group and talk about our feelings and whatnot. But it very quickly, divulged from this is how you journal to let's talk about our trauma, our most secrets, our biggest, darkest secrets, and let's work on it. Let's unpack it all. And I didn't know any better. I was like, oh, this is wonderful. I love helping my fellow, people in the group. But because I think basically we just all opened up, which was great and it felt good in the moment. But then I was left to not know what the hell to do with it. And it put me down a path where I started to get really depressed and I wasn't sure why. I'm like, I'm getting all this help. All these people are supporting me, but there was no solution other than like, well, the universe doesn't make mistakes. So I'm like, oh, okay, so I'm just like, all right. And then I started seeing the life coach one-on-one because I was like, well, maybe that will help. Like the group setting maybe is not good enough for me. I need to go to one-on-one. And then she started telling me things like, at first it was normal, and then it started going like, well, I think you and I were sisters in a past life. And I'm like,
oh boy.
Okay. And then she's like, you should just not take the vaccine. I'm like, oh God, like stuff like that. I'm like, like, she's like, oh, it's going to cause you, pain. I'm like, okay. So anyways, that's my own experience. But it took me like 6 months, almost a full year from like the group coaching to like when I stopped seeing her to realize like, oh, I'm actually hurting myself as opposed to getting over my trauma.
So that's the thing. I shared this. I'm so glad that you shared that experience, but I'm sorry that you had that experience. And I shared this earlier, but I'm trained in EMDR, which we'll get into in a few minutes, but EMDR is like a separate trauma certification beyond all these licenses and all of that. I'm trained in EMDR, and I am sure that I inadvertently trigger people with trauma or re-traumatize them, right? And I'm trained in this.
Yeah.
And thankfully I'm like aware of it and can work on that and can talk to the person and, can minimize that. But then there's these people who are life coaches who have none of this training, who say, I'm going to help you with your trauma. Like, we're re-traumatizing people constantly. And it's really scary.
Yeah, and you feel alone. Like and then you feel worse because you're with somebody. Like you think you're getting help, so it's even worse. It's like, wow, help is not even helping. And then it's like, well, what do I do now?
And of course, these people are typically, like to talk about how successful they are. So they're like, I help so many people. So then you think like, oh, well, what's wrong with me that they can't help me?
Exactly. I know. And half of it's like, not even true, or from their parents helping them provide the lifestyle that they live. So, okay. But yeah, but not all life coaches are like that. I'm not saying every life coach is going to say that they're your past life, brethren, but it happened to me. So be careful. I don't know if I spelled this correctly, but counselor, you said that is kind of a broad term, right?
So sort of, but also not. There is a license that's a licensed professional counselor, an LPC. Oftentimes LPC, like I don't have one of these licenses, but oftentimes LPC license, like not all states have an LMHC license, and some states instead have the LPC license. LPCs can sometimes go across state to state, but it's a good license. It's a similar, to what I talked about with LMHCs. And so if somebody is LPC, that's great. It's wonderful.
Okay. But if you're like a guidance counselor at a high school, you may not be qualified in anything. Okay.
No.
Okay.
No.
Got it. Okay, perfect. All right, let's answer a question from Lexi. Lexi says, I recently moved states and can't afford cash out of my therapist, of 10 years. Do you have any suggestions on getting over the anxiety of starting with someone new?
Oh, that sucks that you had to leave your therapist. I'm sorry. Like that. I'm thinking about my therapist who I love, and I wouldn't want to leave her. I think that it's okay to be anxious about that. I think it's normal you're feeling anxious about that. And I would, if you feel comfortable, talk to whatever new therapist about that. Like, hey, I was seeing my last therapist for 10 years. Like, I'm not happy about having to, start over. It feels weird. I don't want to have to catch you up on everything. I would talk to them about it, because typically even talking to them about it and whatever they can say can help to ease your anxiety. I think it's important for you to recognize that if you have gotten something out of therapy in the past, like you'll get something out of therapy again, even if it's with a different person. And sometimes finding a different person after being with a therapist for a long time can actually be a good thing, right? It can actually not be a bad thing to maybe see a different perspective or a different style. And so looking at it that way, it could be a really beneficial thing.
I like that. Yeah. That's looking on the bright side, but not toxic positivity wise. Like, why should you complain that you have to do something else that's difficult? Like, you should just be grateful.
Yeah, no, that sucks. Like, it still sucks.
Yeah.
Like, I wouldn't want to leave my therapist, but like, it doesn't necessarily mean that a new person won't be able to help you.
See, that's why I like your perspective. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks.
Right? And I just want to bring this up because I see it in the comments, and it's just I want to address it about the yoga stuff that I had said. So, SD says she was born in a cult and had severe trauma from being raised in a mind-controlled environment. She went to a therapist through Yale University, so I would imagine that's like the top level, of what is available probably. And she had no idea how to help me, went to a social worker, had no idea how to help me, and then she went to a spiritual life coach to be able to help her. So that's someone who had a positive experience with life coaching. So again, doesn't mean that all life coaches are, inherently bad for you. But I think, so life coaches technically, like, are they supposed to be helping people with the trauma like that? No, right? Like,
No.
could they be in trouble if they got caught by
The
government?
problem is, like, there's no governing body. Like, who would tell them to stop talking about it?
So if something happened
like,
badly, yeah, it would just be...
Like, I could talk to you, Kia, as a friend about a trauma, and you could give me terrible advice, and you're not going to, like, get arrested for it.
So, yeah, that's the thing. It's like there's no consequences, I guess, because if you made a mistake, so let's say, someone gives advice, and like, so we talked about this, you and I, but like Teal Swan, is someone that I'm very interested in covering in the future, but she often talks about very controversial topics in a very flippant way. And if someone were to take her advice, she hasn't been held culpable in any way to what her clients have done, but shouldn't she be? Like, I don't know, maybe I'm being more like what I think should happen as opposed to what's actually realistic, but like if a therapist gives bad advice or something happens, can't you be held responsible and lose your license? Or no?
Yes. Oh, well, yes. That's a gray area, but yes, you can lose your license. And one thing that Esty mentioned that I want to touch on is that she went to a counselor at Yale and then a social worker, and they weren't able to help her. One of the things that it's our as counselors' responsibilities is to let someone know if we can't help them. Like, if it's out of our scope of practice, like, it is important to seek supervision on that, seek support on that, refer that person to someone who is within their scope of practice. And so, Esty, I'm sorry that they didn't do that for you, because like if somebody had come to me with something that I've never worked with, it would be unethical for me to say, I could totally help you. And so I'm really sorry that they didn't do that for you, because they should have.
Yeah, but it's a good thing that they didn't, I guess, try to do it and give you bad advice, maybe, like that they said, like, oh, it's better to say I don't know how than to treat it without, like you said, without any direction or understanding.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Is there any other titles we should talk about? Any other labels?
So there's also licensed clinical social workers, licensed marriage and family therapists.
Oh yeah, I had those. Okay, wait. At least this one.
So licensed clinical social workers, that license has been around for a very long time. My license, the licensed mental health counselor, that license has only been around since 2005. Historically, the schooling for social workers was more based on like a macro level than a micro level. So the schooling for social work was more based on, how to help like community mental health rather than you're in a room with one-on-one. And that is kind of why the LMHC came out. But again, in practice, LCSWs can practice trust in LCSW. They have the proper licensing. LMHCs. There's also licensed marriage and family therapists, which is an LMFT. Again, that's another licensed. That's great. Licensed and marriage family therapists are taught theories for marriages and families. So I wouldn't necessarily go to a licensed marriage and family therapist for like, trauma therapy or an eating disorder, because they might not have experience with it. They could have experience with it and maybe be really good at it, but they're not really taught those therapy modalities. And then there's also an LCAT, which is a licensed creative arts therapist, which are taught creative arts therapy modalities.
Interesting. Okay, cool.
Yes.
Awesome. I love that. All right. We're going to move on to the next section, but we have one more question from Ray Blair. And maybe you can speak to this, I'm not sure. But her question is, my question is, why so few have health care through Affordable Care Act? Low income and unemployed can get it subsidized. A physician can be your first person to speak to for referral or talk concerns. I don't know.
Yeah. I don't know why so few people have health care through the Affordable Care Act. I think it's great. And it covers counseling services. So
should I do that then? I know I'm definitely not understanding what I should about the Affordable Care Act, but when it was all being talked about a couple years ago that they were going to discontinue it and rechange it, I lost interest, I think, that I thought it was going to be gone. So I just stopped looking into it, but it's still going strong. So if I did sign up, I could get counseling?
Yes, it's still going strong, but to Lexa's point just now, it's kind of a nightmare to sign up for. Like, you have to jump through a lot of hoops, and it's based on how much you make. So typically, Lexa's experience was different, but from my understanding, typically the less you make, the more affordable it is. The more you make, the more you have to pay. It's not, sometimes you can get good, I don't know, I'm not an insurance person, but it's worth looking into. Okay,
so there may be some options, but
yeah, look on the healthcare marketplace.
Gotcha.
Your state's healthcare marketplace is where you would look into it.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you for your questions. Keep them coming. If you have more questions, you can write Q: and your question. That'll help me find it faster. And we'll keep asking Mary Ellen because she's so good at answering these questions. Like, thank you. I know they're like kind of on the fly, just off the cuff. So we appreciate your improv skills.
Thank you. I'm loving this. I love talking about it. So subscribe to Okayish, please. And I can talk about it more. And we'll give people like a way to contact me, right? Because if you have questions, I want people to be able to ask them. Okay, great.
What's the best way you think? Like DMing you on Instagram or emailing you?
Yeah, so Instagram is the best way. I'm at Okayish Podcast. You can email me, MaryEllen at okayishpodcast.com. I'm starting a YouTube too, so at Okayish Podcast. Just anything related to Okayish Podcast, you can probably find me.
And on your website, you can even ask anonymous questions. Is that true?
Yes, that is true. So you can submit a question on okayishpodcast.com, and you don't have to put in your name or email address, so you can submit it completely anonymously too, and I can respond to it.
That's awesome. And this is your Instagram, and I love the colors of your Instagram. It's beautiful.
Oh, thanks.
And here's some tips and things about your life. I love how, I don't know, I always say this, but I love how authentic you are in your reels too. They're just hashtag relatable. But really relatable. Not like, guys.
Full disclosure, I don't like doing reels, but I'm told I need to do reels.
I think they're good. I like them. Yeah. Well, on Friday, I mentioned this earlier, I'm going to do a live stream about Rachel Hollis's latest podcast. But basically she says, guys, like, I ran a marathon with no training, so you can too. It's like, so relatable. Thank you.
Oh my gosh, and that could be like dangerous to one's health. I feel like that's terrible advice.
Yeah. She's like, well, like, you can walk. It's like, yeah, who's going to walk a marathon? But okay. Anyways, okay, so speaking of other therapists and other life coaches and people who give advice in self-help space, one of the things that I've started to see online a lot, and I'm sure a lot of people can agree, therapists have been popping up, and you're one of them, to be fair, on Instagram, has presence, has social media, uses platforms to talk about mental health issues. Now, you're someone who's licensed and has actual schooling and knowledge behind it, but a lot of people aren't and do it too. But the ones who are licensed and have kind of the backing of education, certifications, are also coming online and giving advice, but it becomes unethical, right? In some ways, once you start doing that, because you're giving blanketed advice to a large group. So we're not going to talk about we kind of already covered that with like life coaching, people who aren't certified, but we're going to now talk about people who are certified or therapists who are practicing, but also are now kind of entering the entertainment space, and why it's important to be able to see kind of the difference. So even though someone's licensed, they can still do some ethically gray area type stuff. Am I introducing that correctly?
That's beautiful. That was beautiful. And I will just add, like, I have a podcast. Like, I get it. There are a lot of really, really awesome therapists on Instagram. I don't really do TikTok that much. I'm starting to, but I don't like it. I'm stressed out by it. But there are some really awesome therapists on Instagram and on TikTok. Like, there are some really, really great ones, but there's also some not so great ones, and it's really hard to tell the difference, and sometimes we don't know at first. So yeah, that's why we're talking about it.
Gotcha. And this is not a therapist, obviously. This is Shane Dawson. But one of the people he featured in one of his most viral videos, so this is a video that was posted a few years ago, and it's called The Dark Side of Jake Paul. And it was super popular. Let's see how many views it has. 24 million views. So this was like a super popular, I mean, Shane Dawson at this period of time was like the number one YouTuber. Like, no one was bigger than him at this point. So the whole concept of this video, it was a documentary, okay, I'm saying that very lightly, about diagnosing or deciding if Jake Paul, the YouTuber, was a sociopath. Whether or not he had, sociopathic tendencies. So what Shane did is brought in this woman. Her name is Katie. And basically, she has a YouTube channel. Katie Morton is her name. And she is a therapist. Like, she's actually...
LMFT. She's a licensed marriage and family therapist.
Okay. And so this is her Instagram. So she is an LMFT and a master's in psychology, million on YouTube, wrote a book, Are You Okay? And Traumatized, 2 books. Thoughts on that?
I'll wait till you're done.
Okay. So that's her. So she's got, the entertainment side of the YouTube. She's obviously doing very well in that space, but she has also got her credentials. So that's, seemingly a positive thing. But in this video specifically, she came in and covertly was a part of the video and a part of interviewing Jake Paul, and she was then secretly deciding and giving Shane Dawson information as to whether she believed he was a sociopath or not. So that's kind of where I found out about her, and I wonder if that's ethical, to secretly monitor somebody without their knowledge to determine if they're a psycho, if they're narcissistic, whatever, for entertainment purposes.
So I have about 1,000 things to say on this, but here are the biggest answers. No. No. There are literally so many things wrong with this, but here are the biggest things wrong with it. Number 1, a sociopath is not a diagnosis.
Really?
It's not a diagnosis. What she's referring to is something called antisocial personality disorder. That is a diagnosis. A sociopath is a slang term. It's not a diagnosis. So she wasn't even using like the correct clinical terms.
Okay.
And the reason she wasn't doing it is because more people hear sociopath and, turn their heads. And if I said antisocial personality disorder, a lot of people would be like, what? The other thing is, and Katie even said this, that she has never worked with someone with antisocial personality disorder. So she admitted to it, which is great that she admitted to it. But like, if you've never worked with someone like this, like, what, how is this a thing? The third biggest thing is that when anyone goes to therapy, any of us who have gone to therapy before, we sign HIPAA paperwork and things like that. One of the pieces of paperwork we signed is something called informed consent that says, I'm consenting to you treating me, right? Like, a doctor can't give us surgery if we don't consent to it. We have to say, yes, I'm consenting to you give me surgery. It's the same thing for therapy. Like, I am consenting that you're giving me therapy that could involve a diagnosis, whatever it may be. And so we have to get informed consent either by the person or by the person's guardian if they're under 18. She didn't do that. So
Yeah.
like those are the three big issues with this. Somebody asked if LMFTs can even officially diagnose. I don't think so. I actually don't know the answer to that, so someone else has to speak to that. They can treat, but I don't think they can officially diagnose. Again, I don't know the answer to that, so if someone can, fact check me, that would be great. But the biggest issues here is it's not called sociopath. She's never worked with it, and she doesn't have informed consent to treat that person or to diagnose that person.
Okay, that's basically what I thought, because it seemed, and I get that her purpose, like she's not editing this video, like that was Shane or someone who Shane hired to do that. So it may have been, the way it was edited, because she was part of it where she's just talking about, what she thought, and the fact that she was knowingly going into interviews where she was going to be watching someone in their environment and then giving intel. I think that's where it crossed the line. But, all these like things where it's showing like people walking into traffic and certain things, or like their face is all angry, and that's him. So that's not her necessarily saying like, oh, this is what a sociopath would do. That's, editing. And the problem with all this is it did so well. So 24 million people out there watched this and thought, yeah, or half of them thought, okay, like this must be fine, because it's it's not on TV, it's on YouTube, so there really is no ethical boundaries at all on the internet right now. You could say whatever you want, essentially. But for someone who has such credentialing, it was surprising that she was willing to take her licensing and do this with it.
I'm honestly shocked that she still has her license after this. Like, and who knows, maybe she had to go up in front of the licensing board because of it. But I am absolutely shocked. Like, this is basic stuff that you can't you can't do that. You can't secretly spy on someone and diagnose them. Like, and we talked about this offline, but I want to bring it up, and Esty just mentioned a comment about it. So when Donald Trump was president, a lot of news sources wanted to be like, hey, psychologist, let's get you on the news to say, like, do you think Donald Trump has narcissistic personality disorder? I mean, we can say what we want behind closed doors. We can have pretty good guesses, but like, you can't diagnose someone you've never met. Like, you just can't. And so, like, people are doing that more for like entertainment purposes, and what that's doing is actually it's hurting the field of mental health, because it's like showing these like broad descriptions of like, oh, a narcissist, that's Donald Trump. Like, well,
Yeah.
It's a lot more nuanced than that. And again, like, I've never met Donald Trump. Does that make sense what I'm saying about how it's like,
Yeah.
it's more nuanced than that?
Well, that's why, and I've made the comment before. I've said that Rachel Hollis has had a narcissistic mask slip, and I've made that comment before. I said, narcissistic, but I am not a licensed person, and I don't mean it in a clinical sense. I mean it just in the colloquial narcissist, someone who loves himself a lot, or the Greek god Narcissus that looks at himself in the mirror. Like, that's what I mean. I don't mean to say this diagnosis is exactly what this person has. Like, who knows? I don't know. I have no idea. And like they say, narcissistic personality disorder is rarely diagnosed because the person doesn't usually end up in therapy very often, right? So
correct.
It's hard to even really have a great database of examples. And Donald Trump, for example, anyone that's in the public eye, that's one part of them. Like, the way I am on here is one part of my personality. And then I have a part that is at home by myself. And I have a part that when I have to deal with a client is different. And, you don't know the full picture. You might think like, oh, this is how the person is 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. But maybe not. Maybe that's just how they are in front of the camera because they have some sort of strategy. So how can you tell that person's a narcissist when it could just be politics?
Again, like, can we make educated guesses? Can we say what we want behind closed doors of like, oh, these are the signs? But like, making these broad statements is really, really dangerous.
I see one comment come in. I think it's interesting to point out. So Tess says, the stigmatization of personality disorders within the mental health field is such an important discussion to be had. The way so many of these social media coaches talk about people with personality disorders might help validate victims, but it also seems like it would be really detrimental to those with that diagnosis that want help.
How do life coaches talk about personality disorders? I don't quite know, because I try to stay away from it.
Well, I would say that some of the social media people, and maybe not the life coaches necessarily, but a lot of people say like, get rid of the narcissist in your life, or how to find out if someone's a narcissist, and like signs that someone is being a narcissist in, you know, in your family or whatever. That's what I think she means, but let me know for sure.
Okay,
Tess.
so I have a whole podcast episode about this, that not everyone is dating a narcissist. Sometimes people just are assholes, because we're people and can I swear?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
Hell
so
yeah.
I have a whole podcast episode about like how somehow people are just assholes. Now, if you are worried that you are in an abusive relationship, please contact help. There are a lot of helplines. Please call someone, that kinds of things. Those kinds of things. But like all these life coaches being like what you're saying, Kia, of like 5 signs that you're dating, you know, a narcissist, 5 signs you're being gaslit. Like, absolutely not. Like, no. That's not accurate. Again, this is all very nuanced. It completely depends on the situation, right? Like someone yelling at you, like your significant other yelling at you, doesn't mean they're abusive. It could. There's scenarios where it could, and there's scenarios where they yelled at you once, you know? And so the fact that they're just like, you know, putting this out there, and then all these people, oh my gosh, I struggle so much. All these people come to me and they're like, oh my gosh, I'm being gaslit. And I'm like, that's not gaslight. Like, that sounds like an unhealthy communication style, that we can work on the communication between you and this person. But like, that's not what that is. And again, if you are worried about being in an abusive relationship, like please call for help, because that's very serious. But I think personally, it's taking away the seriousness from like legitimately abusive relationships, because we're just like putting these labels on everything, and it's taking away from like, no, there are people in dangerous situations, and like you having a fight with your significant other, or your significant other being kind of an asshole, like that's taking away from these people who actually like need this type of help and support. Yeah,
I agree. And I think one thing too is like the different levels are so confusing, because if you say like five signs that you're dating a narcissist, and one of them is like they often ignore you or whatever, you know, and then you think, okay, that's what a narcissist is, and then you watch someone's or you, like for example, and someone mentioned this in the comments, the holistic psychologist, you know, she'll say like, you can heal yourself, and it's like, well, you may be able to heal yourself from like a person who yells at you, you can get over it, you know, yourself, but healing from narcissistic abuse, you know, for years and years, I don't even know what's on the screen right now. It's weird. Okay, what the hell?
It's pause Katie Morton.
Okay. Again, that's not her fault. This is the editing, but like, come on. This is ridiculous. They're talking about like psychology, and they're showing devil horns and dolls being cut up. Weird. Anyways, I think, you know, when you think like, oh, you can self-heal yourself, there's different levels. Maybe you can heal yourself out of a bad breakup, but you can't heal yourself necessarily out of like an abusive marriage that you've been dealing with for 20 years or 5 years or whatever. So it's hard, you know, I think people who have these deeper issues might feel bad because people on the internet are saying like, heal yourself, take a supplement, get over it. It's like, oh. Well,
and if you're in a truly abusive relationship, like you need help and support. And then it also offers the question that if you are if you are not in an abusive relationship, but you're going to these life coaches being like, I've been gaslit, I've been abused, this person has been narcissistic, and let's just say you were in like an unhealthy relationship, that's completely taking out your part in that. And maybe like you need to do some work on that too, right? Maybe they weren't perfect and neither were you. So it's very like, we're so quick to point fingers and blame. And sometimes, yes, that's the case and we need to do that. But like, that's not the answer.
Yeah. And I find a lot of times, because I think the social media tends to, well, not, this is going to sound stupid and not true, but hear me out. Social media, when you're a coach, tends to lean positive. And I mean that when you say signs you're dating a narcissist, not signs you are a narcissist, because someone reading that information is not going to want to look within themselves and go, yeah, I have been, doing X, Y, and Z. It's usually towards targeting the victim of whatever thing is going on. But if you're always seeing that, and you're always seeing like ways to tell if you're being victimized, you never can see that you might be the one possibly contributing to whatever is going on. And I think that's probably because that type of content doesn't get the likes and shares as much as the other content.
Well, and okay, so I watch The Bachelor. I don't know if anyone here watches The Bachelor, but this is like the perfect example. So over the summer, there was a season of The Bachelorette where The Bachelorette and one of the contestants got in a fight. Now, everything's edited. I have no idea what was there. Like, I wasn't...
you weren't on set.
I wasn't there. I wasn't on set. But it was an unhealthy conversation. They both see... there was a breakdown in communication. There was a breakdown in communication. And then afterwards, the Bachelorette kept calling him a gaslighter and was like, he gaslit me, he gaslit me, he gaslit me. And in doing so, she's yelling at him. She's interrupting him. She like put her hand up in his face. Like she was doing some like not so nice things. And I was like, wait. Again, I don't know what happens behind closed doors. Maybe he was gaslighting you. I have no idea. But like from what I saw, like that was just like an unhealthy communication breakdown, like not understanding each other. Yeah, Laura, Katie, and Greg. Yeah. And so like, it's like a weird thing because, as Esty said, I don't want to victim blame. Abusive relationships, there is no excuse. It is not the victim's fault at all, not even a little bit, when we're talking about abusive relationships. But right now we're not talking about abusive relationships. We're talking about human fights and human disagreements and things like that, and people are putting these abusive labels on them, and that is that's stressful,
Well, I think too, it's like when you downplay it or you're not going to see I think that's the whole thing. Like this is the answer of why you should go to therapy. Because when a coach or even a therapist puts online 5 steps to decide if you're with a narcissist or not, they're not hearing your story. So there's no way that they can tell which one it is. And there's different levels of everything. It's like, are you just in an abusive relationship? Are you in the not perfect relationship for you because you have disagreements?
And that being said, like if you're in an abusive relationship, are these coaches if you are truly dating someone with narcissistic personality disorder who's abusing you, like you need something else than a life coach. Like you need like a lot of
support.
Like you need a lot of support, know?
So I think the thing is, it's like if you're getting advice from someone who doesn't know you, if they wouldn't recognize you on the street tomorrow, you shouldn't take advice, at least in your own life, as a rule of thumb. If that person, like Rachel Hollis, wouldn't know you from, Joe down the street, like don't take her advice as your God's word. That's, I think, but your therapist would recognize you if you're seeing each other face to face. So I think, and maybe a life coach would too, but that's beside the point. But I think that's a decent rule of thumb. Like, okay, if this person would recognize me tomorrow, I can take the advice a little bit more realistically. If the person does not know you or recognize you or would never, take it with a grain of salt. Fair?
I love it.
Okay.
I love it. Someone, can you pull up the question about empaths?
Oh, yes, I can. Let's see. Was it recent? Was it after the... Oh, wait. Okay. Jessica. I see.
Yeah, Jessica.
Okay. Could you talk about empaths? I know it's not really, but wanted your thoughts. Shane Dawson's a perfect example of empaths. He claims he's an empath.
Okay. So I know that some people will not like this.
Yes.
But an empath is not a thing.
Go on.
It's not like it's not a diagnosis. It's like this label that was like made up. I don't know the history of the word and how it was made up. Human beings all have empathy. People with antisocial personality disorder, aka sociopaths, struggle to have empathy, but other than that, like, we all have empathy. An empath is supposedly someone who feels other people's feelings, and the only way that I have heard the term empath is in a really what word do I want to look for? Like when you put yourself on a pedestal.
Grandizing.
Kind of way. Yes, like a grandiose, like, I have heard it when people come to me and they say, well, I basically know what you do for a living because I'm an empath. And so, like, I feel everyone's feelings. So I'm like, what does that even mean? Like, I still don't really understand, like, what people are trying to say. Like, you feel other people's feelings. Like,
that's basic human nature.
We all do. Like, I don't like understand, like, people, as Esty mentioned, people always call themselves highly sensitive people. Again, that's not like a diagnosis. Like, I think you can take some online quizzes to see if you're highly sensitive. I don't know. I cry a lot. Maybe I'm highly sensitive. I have no idea. So, like, these are just these kind of, like, slang terms. Again, like, I feel like I hear people say, like, oh, well, I dated a narcissist and they gaslit me and it was, you know, even harder for me because I'm such an empath. And I'm like, these words don't make sense. Like, this doesn't make sense.
It's TikTok's fault. There's so much of it.
Words don't make sense.
Oh my God. There's such a funny, you got to get on TikTok more because there's such a funny thing that people do now where it's like, if there's a world event or something and something's going on, it's like the comment will be, me as an empath realizing that the Ukraine invasion is bad. It's like, yeah, no, everyone realizes it's bad, but people will say like, me as an empath realizing that this person is angry and the person's like screaming and, you know, it's very obvious because the joke is like, yeah, you know, being an empath doesn't really mean anything. You just have empathy for others. But yeah, I think you're right. People are like, I'm an empath. Not everybody, but a lot of people will say, I'm an empath. But then they'll have behavior that is not in line with like only seeing the other people's perspectives and giving away all of your feelings or whatever.
Well, and I like the only way that I have heard people referring to themselves as an empath is when people are trying to build themselves up. Like, that's the only circumstance I've heard it in. Like, well, I'm an empath, so I'm amazing because I'm an empath. Like, that's the only circumstance I've heard it in. Mm-hmm. So I'm like, this makes no sense to me.
Or like, oh, I can't be criticized because I'm an empath, so whatever I do is because I care. It's like, oh, okay. Yeah, but even this, I think it's like signs you're an empath. 7 weird things. Like, it's all breaking it down like these listicle style things.
Again, it's not a thing. And the other thing I want to say, I'm kind of like deviating a little bit, but with this like culture of like labeling and blaming, like I feel like it's made us mean.
Yeah.
So like I had a situation with someone recently where they said, well, because I'm such an empath, I need to set stronger boundaries. And that's why I can just say, like, fuck you. And I'm like, wait. No.
Yeah.
Saying fuck you is... I'm so sorry.
No, you're fine. You're good. You're good.
Like, saying that is really, really mean. Like, setting a boundary is great. But, like, just, like, saying mean things to people, that's just mean. And because you're an empath or because you know, have identified yourself as being gaslit doesn't mean that we can go just like be jerks.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's like sending this weird message about it.
Well, like I said, I feel like all the content that I'm targeted with, at least, is from the victim side, not from the possible, not an abuser, but the possible cause of the issues side. It always comes from, you may be the recipient of this abuse, or you may be the recipient of a bad person in your life. It's never like, here are some things that you may be doing that could, you know, be affecting your social life or whatever, like at work, and maybe it's because of stress. Like there's tons of reasons why you could be like, I know I was mean at work many times. I had a team of people who I was not helping. I was the leader of the team, and I was so mean to them because I hated my job. So I was like not a good team leader, but it wasn't their fault. But if I was to go on to TikTok or something, it'd be like, signs you're in a toxic environment. I'd be like, yeah, I am in a toxic environment. So screw everybody, I'm allowed to feel this way. But it's like, I needed to also realize like, well, I can't just treat everyone like shit all the time because I'm upset, but there's not that much. The only place I get that is in therapy where my therapist says, well, what about, when you said that, how, do you think that makes sense? And it's like, no, you're right. I should dial it back and think about it. But if you were just to take advice from online, it's like everyone that is receiving the information is like perfect, like in a vacuum, never made a mistake, basically, is what it seems to me.
Yes. Yes.
And maybe that's just what it is. It's like, because that does better online, so therefore you see that more, therefore, you get it more.
Well, and it's hard. Being honest with yourself is really difficult. And it takes practice, and it's hard, and oftentimes it's easier, right? It's easier to be like, oh, that person I dated was a jackass, right? Like, it's easier to say that. Maybe they were, but like to see our change and our growth, like that's when we have to do the work.
Yeah, and I don't mean to sound victim blamey, and I'm not saying this is everybody, and I realize that can come off easily, but sometimes I realize in my life, or I think in my life, if someone constantly is dating like psychopaths, narcissists, sociopaths, it's like maybe there's a reason why you're interested in those people, and maybe you should look at that a little bit. Maybe don't jump into every relationship and then always and then you're like talking bad about them afterwards. It's like maybe it's true, and I'm not saying it's not, but maybe there's two sides to a story. And I'm not saying that in the extreme cases where it's abusive, like that's different. But in
Absolutely.
most relationships, like that aren't on the abusive end, there's two sides, whether you want to admit it or not. There's two perspectives, and I think it just all gets bundled up into one package, and that's where it gets confusing. Like, where do I stand? Where in the spectrum am I in versus abuse and just like an argument? It's hard to tell.
It's very, very hard to tell. It's very hard to tell. I also want to know, someone said, I'm definitely super sensitive. Stories of abuse will stay with me for years. I can't watch traumatic movies. I can't deal. I don't know you. I don't know anything about this person who said that, but I encourage you to get support around that, because it would be weird if we were watching traumatic movies and like laughing. That would be a red flag. But like, I also want us to be able to, like cope with those feelings and be able to manage those feelings, and learning the best ways that you can manage and tolerate some of those feelings.
And a lot of people are asking, they're talking about the highly sensitive person. Is that a diagnosis in the DSM-5, highly sensitive person?
No.
Okay, so it's more of just like a colloquial, someone who may pick up on certain things?
I don't know enough about it. From my understanding, it's more of like a... you know how people do like personality tests of like extroversion and introversion? It's more like along those lines.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So, but technically you cannot go to a psychologist or a therapist and be diagnosed with highly sensitive. Okay. So if someone does that, then that's not, at least in the traditional sense. Okay. That's good to know.
No. Some people struggle with like sensory stimulation, and that is usually related to an autism spectrum diagnosis or an ADHD diagnosis, having trouble like processing multiple sensory stimuli at one time. Again, that's not a diagnosis, but that can be a symptom of other diagnoses.
Well, I think it's important to make that distinction, because if someone says, I am an empath, I am a highly sensitive person, that, because it's not a diagnosis that you can look at a rubric and see like, okay, there's 5 symptoms in which this person adheres to, then it's up to interpretation, because that's just how it is. So if you can disagree on what that means to you, one person can say an empath means this to me, one person can say a highly sensitive person means this to me, and they're both right, because there is no scientific definition of, what that means. So there will be arguments because there is no scientific, like, this is what a, human being is. These are the traits of a human being. They're not categorized into anything scientifically. So that's why people probably do have disagreements about what it means and whatnot. So it's important to know. So you can't go, so if someone says, I've been diagnosed an empath, no, not true.
Not a diagnosis. Yeah,
okay.
Definitely not a diagnosis.
That's good to know. And I'm seeing people talk about it. So I appreciate everyone's honesty and, their openness to talk about these types of topics, because they're not fun necessarily to talk about. No. And it's very confusing.
It's really, really hard. It's really confusing. And I think that people have really, really good intentions, right? Mm-hmm. I think that it's like going back to the gaslighting thing. If someone is mean to you and someone says, oh, you were gaslit, like, that's a good intention. They want you to be validated, and that's a really good thing. We just have to be careful of, over labeling people, and that labels are not necessarily diagnoses, and that those are two different things.
It's like saying, and this is not the same thing exactly, but you're a jerk. Okay, like, right, that could be different levels. You could be a really big jerk, or just, oh, you said something offhand and that's a jerk. But that's up to my interpretation of what a jerk is.
Yeah, so. Absolutely.
And I'm laughing because I really like this comment. Laura says, me and empath, sensing there's some discussion in the comments. That would be a perfect TikTok comment for what I was talking about earlier.
Me as an empath sensing. That's really funny. Sorry. I was looking at the comments and got distracted.
It's okay. I was laughing.
Oh gosh.
Yes. So let's talk. We're going to bring up some clips of Katie, just a few things, just to talk about her specifically. Which is the first one? Sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I'm going to jump in really sure. I'm really sorry. I did not mean to say that wanting to avoid violent movies makes you need coping skills. Absolutely not. I don't like watching violent movies either. Vicarious trauma is absolutely a thing that is scary and difficult to deal with. If there are things that are affecting your life negatively, if it's getting in the way of, completing daily activities of daily living and things like that, that's when we need some more support.
Gotcha.
I hope that's clear.
Yeah, I think that's good. And I see one question before we move on to the video. So she's Lovely Cry says, I'm curious about your position on the pros and cons of labeling. My mom is a child psychologist and keeps seeing a trend of young children self-diagnosing. I think that's a TikTok thing.
You can't diagnose yourself. You can't diagnose yourself. You can't diagnose other people. You can't diagnose people on TikTok. It is so dangerous. I think labeling can be really good in some ways. Like, let's say you're a child and you feel different maybe, and you feel like there's something wrong with you and you don't know, and then someone, puts a diagnosis on you and, teaches you about it and educates it. That can help people to feel like, oh, I'm not crazy. Other people experience this. I'm not alone. I think it can be very helpful in that way. But like, I think that, TikTok diagnosing is silly.
Now here's the one thing that because I agree with that. However, when people were saying that, because I've heard that argument before, they say, well, it's because not everyone has the money to get diagnosed. It's almost like classist to say that self-diagnosing is not acceptable. So to me, it's like, oh God, that's true, but also even with a medical thing, like let's say you broke your arm and you can't afford to go to the hospital because you don't have insurance. Should you just assume like, okay, it's broken, I'm going to take care of it myself? I feel like it's the same thing with mental health. It's like, yeah, you could go Google like how to fix a broken arm and maybe it would help you and be okay. But also I still think you need to go get a diagnosis somehow, some way, figure it out. And self-diagnosing just isn't the same thing.
So I think that it's human nature to be like, ooh, these symptoms of anxiety sound like me. Is that anxiety? Oh, this is what that feels like, right? I think it's human nature and important if somebody's like, you have depression, and you're like, no, I don't really feel that. Like, uh, that's not really how I'm feeling. I don't think that that's something bad. However, if we're choosing to share about it on the internet, if we're choosing to share about it on the internet and try to help other people, we could be inadvertently, like, if I think that I have anxiety, but I don't really know, and I'm talking about my anxiety on the internet, but really what I'm talking about is OCD, it can confuse people. So identifying your own symptoms, identifying how you feel, being able to like be in touch with your emotions is absolutely incredible. Like, that's an absolutely wonderful, skill to have.
Well, I think that
gathering information, all of that is great.
Yeah.
It's just, going on TikTok and saying, hey, I think you have ADHD because I saw this TikTok is, not great.
Or if somebody, or I guess the thing too is like with the money thing, it's like, let's say you think you have anxiety, but you can't afford to see a therapist because the commitment and whatnot to work on it is too high for you cost-wise. How else are you supposed to identify the anxiety? A lot of people are self-diagnosing so that they don't have to go and pay the money to see a psychiatrist or see a therapist or psychiatrist. What is there a solution to that, or is that just like one of the things that happens and it sucks, but you got to deal with it?
Unfortunately, there's not really a solution to that. I don't think educating yourself I don't think there's ever anything wrong with educating yourself. I think it's important to look at where you're educating yourself from. So maybe look at like reputable sources online, like not TikTok. Because maybe the person on TikTok is right, but like we have no way of knowing if they're right. So
it's tough.
And, doing that and going to your doctor and saying, hey, look, I have A, B, C, D. The internet is telling me that's insert diagnosis. Like, can you help me with that? Can be really, really helpful.
Yeah. And if you can't see the doctor because you can't afford it, let's try to get healthcare for cheaper, and we'll start to work on that as a society, because I think that would solve
Canada.
Yeah, that would solve a lot of issues, I think, with affordability or therapy. Therapy, for most people, $100 plus an hour. So if we could get that down to like $20, $15 an hour, not for the therapist, but for us as the payer, subsidize it, something. I think that's probably the only solution that I see.
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you for that question. And so let's watch a little bit of Katie. She's going to talk about some things that, therapists talk about. PTSD is one of them. Let me see what time frame this one was supposed to be started at. 8:40. Okay, so let's back it up a tiny bit.
For those of us who don't know, PTSD is post-traumatic stress disorder.
Yes. And now there's a new thing, or not a new thing, but I hear a lot about the CPTSD, the continuing, like the non-one event, but it's like a longer, like multiple events have caused PTSD.
Complex trauma?
Maybe, yeah, complex PTSD, or is that something else?
I mean, it's
something. Okay. I hear, because I've heard a lot about like, if you go to war or someone gets shot in front of you, that's like a PTSD can bring you back that moment. But something like little things or smaller things over time can also be considered the complex PTSD.
Or that could be the one PTSD. Like, so psychologists and researchers don't agree on a definition of trauma. Because there isn't really a definition of trauma, because what's a trauma to me might not be a trauma to you, because our brains process things differently. And
True.
So, like, obviously people who have been through traditional traumas, like what we think of as traditional traumas, abuse, war, things like that, natural disaster, they may develop PTSD, they may not, but like there's much more research now that a lot of us have little traumas, and we can develop PTSD from those little traumas, even if it isn't necessarily a trauma to you. Does that make sense?
Gotcha. Yeah, because trauma is subjective as well. Like you said, like giving birth isn't necessarily a trauma, but to a woman who had a bad experience or had to get a C-section or something, it could be to her. So that,
Exactly.
Yeah. So that makes sense.
Exactly.
Okay. Katie Martin, we're going to hear from you now.
And finally, our sixth misconception, that PTSD can't be treated. Now, I personally haven't heard that it can't be treated, but I do hear a lot of people online saying that even with treatment, it never gets better. And here's what I have to say about that. In doing research for my book, I found out that traditional talk therapy, meaning you go to therapy and you talk through your trauma in as much detail as possible until it's no longer emotionally upsetting to do. That style isn't enough for all trauma victims. In fact, in van der Kolk's book, The Body Keeps the Score, it's a great book, but he explains that talk therapy isn't enough for almost 60% of patients with PTSD. 60%! That blew my mind because talk therapy was what we were taught in graduate school as being the primary treatment for PTSD. Wild. But what van der Kolk states is that...
So just to pause, I want us to finish one part of it, but talk therapy is actually not good for PTSD because I've mentioned the term re-traumatizing a lot. And so traditional talk therapy, which is like CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, can re-traumatize people if we don't have the proper training, if we don't know how to do that. So when she's talking about it's not enough, that's not necessarily true. It's not the correct form of therapy. And so like this is just another example of like Katie Morton, like I don't really know what she means when she's saying it's not enough because it's not the right form of therapy.
Well, it's one of those slippery slope things because one person hears one thing and one person hears, I knew it. I'm going to just, inhale some essential oils. I knew that therapy didn't work for me. And, that's how they're going to hear it. And someone else could hear it and go, okay, maybe there's another alternative type of therapy for PTSD or whatever. But that's the thing. Like when you're not having a conversation, two people aren't interacting together and exchanging ideas and clarifying statements. That's when you get like, well, I'm just going to interpret this how I want to. And that's where I think it becomes a problem.
Absolutely. And again, I want to just say as a caveat, I think that a lot of people who are maybe saying harmful things mean well. Like, I think they have very good intent. Not everyone, but I think a lot of people have very good intentions and like want to help people.
Totally.
But again, it's not computing correctly.
Yeah, and I think because people have good intentions, if you do criticize, it's taken like, well, and as I always say this on this channel, you're a hater, you're a troll, you're trying to take away mental health facilities or mental health resources to people. It's like, no, I don't think that at all. I think it has its time and place, but don't replace the whole industry of mental health care that it takes a lot of time and effort to get to with TikTok, listicles. That's not the solution.
Right. And I just want everyone to have clarification on what certain things mean and, because everyone needs something different.
And someone, Lovely Cry says, if you're encountering counselors, therapists who say, I don't accept insurance because of XYZ, then do your research, obviously, but run. Do you find that a lot of therapists don't or have practices where they don't take insurance?
Most therapists I know in private practice do not take insurance because insurance companies, if we're talking about insurance companies being difficult for the client, insurance companies are also very difficult for the therapist.
But that's the insurance company's fault and the systemic issues that go on in the healthcare industry in the United States. That's not the therapist's fault. That's the system. That's not individuals' fault. So
Correct.
let's blame
Correct.
the people.
Therapists are grossly underpaid by insurance companies. Insurance companies can do things like, so let's say Kia comes to me for therapy. And I say, okay, Kia has a diagnosis of generalized anxiety disorder. I'm going to see Kia once a week. And I submit that to insurance and say, I'm going to see Kia once a week. Here's her diagnosis. Insurance can come back and say, you know, people with generalized anxiety disorder only need therapy once a month. So we're only going to reimburse you for once a month. So then I just got paid for one session when I should have been paid for 5 sessions. So, you know, that can be tricky.
And then half your time is spent trying to talk to insurance as opposed to talking to patients. Is there, do most therapists, in your opinion, do sliding scale? Is that fairly common?
A lot. Yes.
Okay. What's the best way to handle that? How to ask, like, hey, I can't really afford $250 an hour. Or do you
I would
bring it
just
up?
ask, do you do a sliding scale? Also, depending on your insurance, I know a lot of insurance companies these days have like health savings and flex spending accounts. Like therapists who don't take insurance can take flex savings or health spending accounts.
Okay.
Also, depending on where you work, there's things called EAPs, which stands for Employee Assistance Programs.
Okay.
Which often will offer, like, you can go to this therapist and see the therapist like 5 times for free, and then it'll be like a discounted rate, and the employer will kind of like make up the difference. So that's another good option.
Okay. I like it. Do you want me to keep playing this one? What she says here?
Yeah, actually, yes.
Okay. Perfect. All right.
Most patients need something additional in order to achieve full remission of their PTSD symptoms. These additional things are things like EMDR, schema therapy, somatic experiencing. And I've even looked into other treatments still being researched, like vagus nerve stimulation or VNS treatment, and stellate ganglion block, all of which have research supporting their effectiveness in the treatment of PTSD and other mental illnesses. Even my good friend,
Okay, so
Dr. Alexa Altman.
You can stop it right there. She's about
Okay.
to talk about doing mushrooms to help with PTSD.
Which I've heard is a thing, but don't just do it on your own, please.
Yeah, I don't know enough about it.
God.
So she's talking about all these therapies that she is not trained in. And now that's okay. But she's mentioning what worries me is that, here's what worries me. She's talking about how these statistics about how talk therapy isn't enough, when in reality, talk therapy is not the appropriate type of treatment. But then she provides talk therapy, and now she has a book called Traumatized. So I'm confused, and I'd like someone to answer this question for me about how this person who's saying that talk therapy doesn't work with PTSD, and she does talk therapy and doesn't do these other types of therapies, now has a book called Traumatized. Like, does that make sense?
Does she say talk therapy and all this stuff? Like, or she says no talk therapy at all? Well, I guess for PTSD, she was saying no talk therapy.
No, so she was saying talk therapy isn't enough, that you should do talk therapy and these things.
Okay.
But truly, you should do these things instead of talk therapy, because talk therapy can be very re-traumatizing and triggering.
And she's a talk therapist who just wrote a book about trauma, which is confusing.
That's confusing, right? And so maybe she knows a lot. Again, I'm not in her head. I have no idea what she knows. But this is where, like, I want us all to understand the types of things we're consuming, right? Because she's talking about how these are the therapies you do for trauma. I don't do these therapies, but I'm going to write a book about trauma.
Yeah.
That doesn't make sense to me.
Unless, and I haven't read the book, unless it's about all of the mishaps that she's made along the way. Which I doubt, but, you know.
Maybe.
Until we read it, I guess we can't speculate too harshly. But yeah, I mean, it is confusing. I think, like you said, traumatized is also one of those words that means so many different things to so many different people. And what does it mean to her? I don't know. I have to read the book, I guess. But don't take trauma as a defined term of this is what it means to be traumatized, because it's different.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I like it. Okay. We're going to switch now. Oops. talking about her
Yes.
mushrooms.
And Kia, I have till about 2:45.
Okay. You want to skip the second one and want to go to the terms, defining
Yeah.
terms? I think that'd be fun. Okay. So let's do that. Sorry, Katie. We'll get to you next time.
Oh, we have more to talk about.
We'll talk to Katie on our... Maybe she'll come on the show. We can have a three-way talk. That'll be fun. We can ask these questions directly, immediately.
Yeah. I have a lot of questions.
Next, I want to get Rachel Hollis on the podcast, or I could call this a podcast, a live stream, and then we can get Katie, and then we can get Shane Dawson, and we can get everybody. We'll get Dave. We'll do a couples therapy with Dave and Heidi. It'll be great.
Well, and part of what I do for a living, right, is I want to understand people's behaviors.
Sure.
So, like, you mentioned the term hater before. I don't want to hate on these people. I want to understand, because I don't get it.
Yeah.
And I also want to educate about how it could potentially be hurting people.
Yeah, and I think what I always go back to, because I sometimes have existential crisis where I'm like, am I actually a hater? Is this some sort of thing I'm not dealing with? But I think about it where when I come on live and someone was to comment and say, you're an idiot and I hate everything you say, I'm not okay. I don't love that, obviously, but I am accepting that that's possible because I'm putting myself out here. I want to talk about these things. This is a privilege to be able to have the time to speak and do live streaming. But same thing when you're offering self-help. You have to, I think, to enter that space, be like, some people aren't going to agree and they're going to criticize me, and that's okay. That's why I think I wouldn't call someone a hater. It's like, well, that person disagrees. Or if they're calling me fat slob, that's one thing. They are a hater. But if they're saying like,
nice.
yeah, if they're saying like, I disagree with that point, I think this,
totally
it's like, fine. That's life, man. I'm fine with it. And I think they should be too. But okay, here's another website I created for you. I'm searching I need therapy, and I'm finding all these psych buzzwords. So you're going to help define these for us, and it'll be super fun.
Yes.
Okay. Gaslighting.
So we already talked about this a little bit. Gaslighting is not a clinical term. Gaslighting is a form of, abuse that's kind of, gaslighting can be often used synonymously with like manipulation, things like that. It's not, a good thing. But again, it's overused. People being like, you're gaslighting, you're gaslighting, you're gaslighting. And again, what this person says is gaslighting might be different to this person. And we just have to be very careful about that. We also have to be careful that people can be jerks. People can be jerks, and that doesn't necessarily mean they're gaslighting you. Maybe they are. And maybe there are. And it's important to, I don't want anyone to be a jerk to you. That's not what I'm saying. But before we go throwing around like serious terms, we need to be careful of that.
My theory, or my definition to me of gaslighting, is someone in your home, and this is like where the term came from, I guess, like someone in your home is turning off the lights through a remote, a secret remote, and then telling you, I'm not doing that. You're crazy. The lights have been on the whole time. And you go, oh my God, maybe I am crazy. And you start to question your reality. That to me is gaslighting. And it's very different than, having two perspectives on a situation. Now, obviously, it can be, if you're, like, for example, my parents have very different memories than I do about childhood stuff. Could that be gaslighting? Perhaps. Or it could be, well, we disagree about, what we felt about a certain scenario. And so we're having two different perspectives. But I think gaslighting is the intent to make it look like you're crazy.
Correct. If you are in a relationship, whether it's with a significant other, a friend, whoever, and they're saying, no, that didn't happen, you're crazy, like that is not a safe relationship to be in. Calling them a gaslighter is not going to help. I encourage you to get support to not be in that relationship.
Gotcha. Okay. I like that one. So there's a song called Gaslighter. It's like a country song. It's a good song. Yeah, it's called Gaslighter. You're a liar, or something like that. I'll send it to you later. But
Interesting.
That's a good song, but not necessarily accurate. Okay, I hear this a lot too. Trauma bonding and trauma dumping.
Okay, so trauma bonding is actually, like, the actual term about trauma bonding is when the person being traumatized, so let's say someone's abusing me and I feel a bond with that person and I feel like empathy and like sensitive to that person. Kind of like oh my gosh, I'm blanking on the term. Kind of
Stockholm
like
syndrome?
Stockholm's. Yes. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. So like a lot of people are using trauma bonding to be like, I'm bonding with someone talking about my trauma. That's lovely. Like if you can talk to someone and support each other, like that's wonderful. But like trauma bonding actually came from bonding with the person who's causing you the trauma. I also
Interesting.
really don't like the term trauma dumping, because trauma dumping, again, not a clinical term, refers to just like spilling all your trauma. And like we want to encourage people to share. Like
Yeah.
if they feel comfortable sharing, and if it's not re-traumatizing them, and it's with safe people that are like, being respectful of them, then like we want to encourage that sharing. I think that people often use talking about their trauma as like a coping skill. Like maybe they're not getting the help or support they need, and so they kind of like incessantly talk about their trauma. Again, there's not necessarily anything wrong with that. I think that probably means that they're trying to work through it and not able to for some reason. And like, that's why they're talking about it so much.
Yeah.
But again, these are just like kind of slang terms that people are using that, the people using these terms could be meaning something totally different, but we don't really know.
I saw a TikTok, and this was like, it went viral because of it. It was a alleged therapist. I don't know if she really was or not, but she said she was a therapist. And she made a TikTok about like, oh, I hate when my clients trauma dump on me all day. You should never feel bad about talking about your trauma with your therapist, correct?
Absolutely not. That's a wonderful thing to talk about.
Okay.
Oh my gosh, absolutely not. I want to encourage people to feel safe talking about these things.
And talk about it with you, not, you don't have to talk about it to your friends then maybe, or your family if they've, heard enough. It's like, do that in the therapist's office. Number one choice.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I like it. Okay.
Wow, that's terrible.
Yeah, I'll have to send that to you. Narcissist. We already kind of talked about this one, but
Yeah, so there is a disorder called narcissistic personality disorder. Narcissism is also a trait, like a personality trait. So like we can say that someone has narcissistic tendencies or traits. We obviously can't diagnose people with narcissistic personality disorder. I like struggle with the term narcissist because like it's kind of like how I struggle with the term like bitch. Like, am I a bitch, or am I being a bitch, or am I like having some like not great traits right now? Right. So like, does this person display like an ongoing pattern of these behaviors, and this is like an issue, and I maybe want to rethink my relationship with them? Maybe. Or like, are they, kind of being a jerk one day and
going through
again,
something. Yeah.
Right. Being careful with kind of like how we're using it and labeling it.
Yeah, because I don't think anyone wants to be called a narcissist, whether they are or not. I don't think anyone enjoys the being called that.
I don't think it helps anyone.
Yeah, exactly. Inner child. This is one Rachel Hollis has been speaking about quite often lately.
Oh my gosh, what has she been saying?
Well, she teases it in her podcast intro. She's like, let's talk about your inner child. And she says, she's working on her inner child. Generally, she hasn't gone into detail about it, but what does that mean?
Oh boy. So we all have an inner child, right? Like we were children. We were all children at one point. There are parts of us that are still childlike, right? There are parts of us that maybe they're not healed. A lot of times inner child is talked about when talking about trauma, right? So like, if I had a trauma happen to me when I was 7, then there might be a lot of parts of me that kind of like stopped maturing at the age of 7, right? So I'm a 32-year-old, but maybe like I need to do some inner child work to, kind of like heal that little 7-year-old inside of me that kind of never got healed. So like, I don't really have a problem with like people talking about it because it's something talked about in therapy. I have a problem with people when people are like, oh, well, you know, I only acted that way because that was my inner child. Like, no, like, it's not an excuse to be a jerk.
Yeah.
Like, understanding it, you know, understanding the 7-year-old inside of yourself that was traumatized and not healed from it is an important thing to understand. But, like, I can't go, like, yell at people and be like, oh, it's my inner child. Like,
So
no.
it's a concept, but not a good excuse.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
I like it. Okay, we got two more. 2/3. Codependent.
So, if you struggle with codependency, a really good book is Codependent. It's called Codependent No More.
I've read it.
Did you like it?
Yeah, I liked it. I didn't think it was totally my situation, but I could definitely see like, okay, this is good information.
Yeah. So again, codependency. Gosh, codependency is a negative, is seen in a negative light because we all want to be independent. Codependent does not mean getting support from other people. It does not mean, you know,
Relying
leaning
on
other
somebody.
people. Absolutely not. Codependent is more like things are so like enmeshed and intertwined that like what happens to this person directly affects you and like you like things like that, and that's not healthy. Codependent I personally have seen it as like a slang term, like, oh, I'm with my best friend again today, haha, we're codependent, and I just like don't love that because I'm like, well, no. You know, again, like using these terms in like slang ways sometimes like takes away the like validity of them.
I've heard of it in I watch Intervention a lot, the show, where an enabler and a drug addict are codependent on each other. One gets the money and one gets the, you know, feeling like, oh, I am helping this person stay alive. That's how I've heard of it and felt about it. But yeah, it's been used lately, I think in the last 2 years or so, as more of like relationship styles. But different extreme levels.
I think that it's appropriate to use when talking about addiction a lot of the time, because I think that oftentimes it does happen with people who are struggling with an addiction because of their circumstances. But again, codependency is not a diagnosis. It's not like you can go to the doctor and be diagnosed codependent. It's one of those things where, you know, it's a description. It can be a description of like relationships or circumstances.
Got it. Okay. Okay, we sort of touched on this too, but this is the last one. Sociopath/psychopath. These are, well, psychopath can be diagnosed? Really?
Not a diagnosis.
Wow.
Not a diagnosis. So, like, these are not in the DSM. The DSM is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. They're not in the DSM. So sociopath is antisocial personality disorder is typically what people mean. That is a diagnosis.
Okay.
Psychopath, people are often referring to like narcissistic personality disorder. They may be referring to another type of personality disorder. But yeah, they are not diagnoses.
That's interesting. I did not know that. Because you can have
descriptive words.
Yeah. And you can say someone's acting like a psychopath who's having a psychotic break, but that doesn't mean like, oh, that's defined medically psychopath forever. It's more of like you can have a psychotic episode. That doesn't mean you're a psychopath.
So having a psychotic episode is also not a diagnosis.
Really?
So having a dissociative episode is a diagnosis.
Okay.
Like the term like psychotic break is not like, that's a descriptive term, but again, that's not a diagnosis. So
that's really good to know. Yeah,
absolutely. A lot of times, like the example I'm thinking of is schizophrenia. Symptoms of schizophrenia often don't show up until like someone is in their early 20s. And then oftentimes when they show up, people are like, oh my gosh, this person's having a psychotic break. Like what's actually happening is the symptoms for schizophrenia are starting to show because they're at the age where, you know,
gotcha.
they start to show. So yeah, so those are not actual terms.
Wow.
I mean, like diagnostic terms.
They're words, but they're not in the book of DSM-5.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
And that's important because that's, you know, if someone says again, like, oh, I'm diagnosed psychopath, it's like, no, you're not. Someone diagnosed you that wasn't a professional in the field that you think.
That's not a diagnosis.
Okay, I like it. We learned a lot. I know we're right on time. So we're about to end I keep calling it a podcast. We're going to end the live stream. I mean, this could be a podcast. You have a podcast. We could make this into a podcast if we wanted to. Take the audio.
We could. I like the live stream, though. This is really fun.
It's fun, right? Well, I think everyone that's here right now, that's still with us, should follow Okayish Podcast on Instagram. And if you have more questions that we didn't get to during the live stream, you can ask her via DM. She will respond. But if you want to do it anonymously, you can go to Okayish Podcasts. Wait, hold on.
.com.
Okayishpodcast.com. Or, right, this one also counts, MaryEllenDance.com. Is that the same one?
Oh, yeah, that's kind of like an old version. But yeah,
Okay.
You can go to any of those.
Okay.
And you will find me.
And also, subscribe to the Okayish Podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, whatever.
That would be great. And please, if you disagree with anything I'm saying, please tell me. Because, like, this is what I have learned, like, from my experiences. This is what I know. I can share some of the educational background I have. But I also, like, everyone has different experiences. And I always want to learn from those experiences and learn from other people. So, like, please tell me, too. And hopefully I can pass along some like, good information and like helpful information to help understand things.
Perfect. And you're not going to be considered a hater. So
no, absolutely not. Absolutely not.
If you have critiques or criticisms or questions or need answers, Mary Ellen's your girl.
Yeah, let me know.
Awesome. Well, thank you everyone at home for joining us. Hopefully we can do this again sometime. Maybe we'll have another follow-up and we can do some more definitions and questions because I think everyone seemed to enjoy this. So thank you again for being here.
Yeah, and let us know too, because I would love to do more follow-ups on this. So let us know like things that we didn't include today that you'd want to hear more about.
Yeah, and if you can afford it and you can do it, get in therapy because it's awesome. That's always my final thought.
Yes, absolutely.
Right. Yes. Well, we'll see you soon.